In this video, we're going to take a look at two different approaches to creating the illusion of realistic fur or hair. I'm going to start with a 2H pencil. I'm working on Bristol paper and I'm using the vellum surface. Bristol paper comes in two different surfaces. You can choose the smooth surface or the vellum surface. The vellum surface is still very smooth. It just has a slight tooth or texture. We'll begin by putting a light layer of graphite on the surface. We're making horizontal strokes for the most part, but these might curve slightly. Now that we have a good initial application of graphite on the surface, we can go back and start developing the value. Now, value is the darkness or lightness of a color, and value can be measured by shades, which are the darker values, and tints, which are the lighter values. In order to create the illusion of realistic texture, no matter what the surface is you're trying to depict, you need to consider the value. In most cases, you'll want to create a full range of value. This means that you'll have the darkest darks and the lightest lights. So now that we're starting to develop some of the values, we're going to look for opportunities to make a bit of shadow in areas. These darker locations will work with the lighter values to create the illusion of the texture. If layers of graphite are applied to the surface, you may go back with a Hake brush to smooth out the appearance a bit. Now, as I just mentioned, the relationships of the light and dark values play an important role in creating that illusion of texture. So we're going to slowly build up the darker values. Of course, we'll leave areas of lighter value and midtone in between. As we gently apply these progressively darker values, we'll start to develop the texture. At this point, I've switched over to a softer graphite pencil. In this case, this is an HB pencil. This is as soft as I'll go for this first demonstration. We also need to consider the directional lines that we're making. Of course, many of the hairs overlap, and that creates some areas of shadow underneath. So as we're developing these darker values, we'll be sure to indicate those areas of cast shadow that happen in between each collection of hair strand. Here's a closer look at what I mean. We're going to be pulling lines mainly horizontally as the hair flows, but these lines might be at a slight diagonal a bit and might curve slightly. Underneath each collection of hair, of course, we'll put areas of cast shadow where the value is going to be a slight bit darker. Of course, the hair that we're developing in this first demonstration is longer and softer. In the second demonstration that I'll show you in a moment, we'll create the illusion of coarser hair that is a bit shorter. For softer hair, such as this, we'll need to think about the hair as clumps or collections of hair strands, instead of considering drawing every single hair strand. That would not only take a very long time to accomplish, but it really wouldn't communicate the texture that we're after. So we want to think about these collections of clumps and how they might overlap one another. And as they overlap, of course, there's a bit of darker value underneath, a slight bit of shadow. But we also need to consider that light is hitting in just as many areas as well, and there needs to be some areas of lighter value that are preserved as we develop these different forms. So we're thinking about the hair as basically an overall form that has darker and lighter sections within it. If you keep this in mind while you're developing the texture, it'll help you make decisions on where you need to create areas of darker value and where you need to leave the lighter values alone. Sure, we may still have a few strands that stick out here and there, and it's okay to just use direct lines for this. So now let's go ahead and revisit the surface with the Hake brush and just move some of that material around. Remember, we're after a softer appearance here, so transitions can be smoother. Now let's pull out a few highlights. For this, I'll use an eraser. In this case, the eraser is encased in a pencil. I like to call this an erasal. This will allow me to lift a few areas of highlight out of the hair. Then we can go back again, this time with the HB pencil, and darken the values even further. Here again, we're pushing the relationship of dark and light values. We're expanding the range of value in the drawing. And as we get more precise with each one of the clumps of hair that we create, we can go back and put a few defined lines with a sharpened pencil. This will, of course, increase the contrast and help communicate the form of the hair even further. Now, the hair we're creating here is somewhat of a mid-tone overall. You might think golden retriever here. At least that's what I was thinking when I created this texture. If you're creating hair that's a bit darker, you're just going to have more areas of shadow. You'll still have areas of highlight. It's important to keep in mind that no matter what color the texture that you're creating is, you still have light areas, and you'll still have dark areas, of course. Of course, for much lighter hair, like perhaps a very light blonde, you'll still have areas of darker value, just like we'll still have areas of lighter value with darker colored hair. Now, like I mentioned, I'm sticking with the HB pencil for my darkest value. I'm still able to get fairly dark values by adding a bit of pressure on the pencil. But if you find that you need to push your values even darker, of course you might try a softer pencil, like a 2B or maybe even a 4B pencil. We'll add a few stray hairs here and there, just as I mentioned before. And that will finish up our softer hair. Now let's look at creating some coarser hair. This time we're going to start off by thinking about the highlights. I'm using a clay tool here, which has a very sharp tip at the end. Not so sharp that it will cut you or anything, but sharp enough to put indentions into the surface of the paper. You might can even see them there from the light. I'm making strokes just like I was drawing white hair on the surface. These indentions will create crevices where a softer graphite pencil can't reach. In this case, I'm using a General's Layout pencil, which is about equivalent to a 4B. Then I can go back with a blending stomp and lightly blend the value over the top of the paper. Of course, here again the graphite will not go into the grooves that I created. Now, this gives us a nice starting point. We can go back at this point with an HB pencil and start to add the shadowed locations that we need in between each hair to communicate a three-dimensional illusion. Of course, here again, we're considering the same factors. In order to create the illusion of texture, we've got to create a full range of value, and we've got to make sure that those relationships of value communicate the texture that we're after. With the sharpened HB pencil, I'm able to put bits of shadow even inside of the grooves that I created with the clay tool. I can put locations of cast shadow that overlap hairs that may be just underneath the hairs that are closer to the viewer. This increases the illusion of depth and begins to make the fur look a bit more believable. Of course, here again, we can continue to slowly push the value, increasing the contrast and the tonal range in the drawing. As we add some of the shadowing, some of the hairs will appear like they're slightly closer to the viewer, while some will appear a little bit further away. This will create that illusion of depth that we're after. Now, of course, I'm using an HB pencil again to create my darkest values. If you find that the HB pencil doesn't make your darker values dark enough, of course you can use a softer pencil like a 2B or a 4B pencil. So there you have it, two different approaches to creating the illusion of fur with graphite. I hope this video helped you out, and thanks for watching.